My name is Samantha Hayes, 35. I stood quietly at the very back of the sprawling naval auditorium, dressed in an unassuming grey civilian blazer, completely ignored by the people who shared my last name. Today was supposedly the crowning achievement of my family's legacy. My younger brother was receiving his trident, ascending to the elite ranks of the Navy SEALs. For 12 agonizing years, my family had meticulously written me out of their narrative. To them, I was the ultimate embarrassment, the weak, undisciplined daughter who abruptly washed out of the Naval Academy in her 3rd year and settled for a meaningless, paper-pushing corporate job. They thought I lacked the mental fortitude to serve. They believed I was a fragile failure who couldn't handle the pressure. But as I watched the ceremony unfold, my encrypted secure phone vibrated with a priority clearance alert confirming my extraction protocols for a highly classified operation in Eastern Europe had just been successfully executed. I am not an insurance administrator. I am a colonel in Air Force Special Operations Command, and I have spent the last decade orchestrating covert intelligence missions that my family doesn't even have the security clearance to read about. I wasn't here today to celebrate or to seek their long-withheld approval. I was here because I knew the commanding officer overseeing this graduation. When the general stepped onto the podium, his hardened eyes scanned the sea of white uniforms and proud families, bypassing the decorated veterans in the front row until they locked directly onto mine. The flash of absolute shock and profound respect on his face was unmistakable. Before I tell you what he said and what happened after I walked out, tell me, what time is it for you right now and where are you watching from? I'm curious to see how far this story will travel. The auditorium lights dimmed, but in my mind, the thunderous applause of the crowd violently twisted and distorted, morphing into the sharp, aggressive crack of my father's fist slamming against our oak dining table 12 years ago. As I watched my father, Thomas Hayes, a man who wore his retired Navy captain title like a badge of absolute moral authority, puff out his chest in the front row, I didn't see a proud parent. I saw the man whose face had contorted with blinding disgust the night I told him I was leaving the Naval Academy for a path he would never comprehend. The memory played in my mind like a high-defin recording. The smell of his stale cigar, the veins bulging in his neck as he screamed, "A Hayes does not quit. You have humiliated this family, Samantha. You lack the spine for real duty. You are a defective, embarrassing clerical error in my bloodline." That night had been the genesis of my isolation. For over a decade, I had been forced to swallow his vitriol, maintaining a mask of submissive silence because the intelligence protocols governing my true service were absolute. Standing at the back of the auditorium, I analyzed my parents not as family, but as predictable, flawed behavioral profiles. My mother, Eleanor, sat beside him, dabbing at her dry eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief, playing the role of the perfect supportive matriarch. Yet my mind juxtaposed her current performance with the suffocating silence she had weaponized against me for years. Whenever relatives asked about my life, she would swiftly pivot the conversation to Jack's fitness scores or his latest promotion, treating my existence like a terminal illness. They had politely decided never to mention in polite company. To them, I was the ultimate failure, the daughter who washed out and settled for a meaningless paper-pushing corporate job at an insurance firm. They didn't realize that the resilience required to survive their relentless psychological freezing out was the exact same resilience that allowed me to withstand torture simulation training in unmarked black sites. They thought they had successfully erased me from their legacy, never suspecting that the mediocre daughter was actually the one holding the classified strings that dictated their world. As they continued to shower Jack with adoration, I felt a cold, jagged spike of resolve settle in my gut. They thought they were the ones who had discarded a failed product. They had no idea they had actually discarded a predator. I ask you watching this, when the very people who systematically broke your spirit and mocked your existence for 12 agonizing years finally realize their grave, catastrophic mistake. Does their sudden panic-induced regret erase the decade of psychological torture they inflicted? On the brilliantly illuminated stage beneath the massive imposing flags of the United States Navy, Daniel confidently stepped forward to finally receive his eagle and trident. He looked every single bit the flawless golden boy our parents had ruthlessly manufactured him to be. Tall, broad-shouldered, and radiating an almost suffocating aura of arrogant certainty. He stood there as if he truly believed the entire world owed him its absolute admiration. As the coveted golden pin was firmly pressed into the crisp fabric of his pristine white uniform, the crowd erupted into a deafening roar. But Daniel didn't look at the applauding admirals. Nor did he immediately look at our weeping mother in the front row. Instead, he slowly scanned the massive crowd, soaking in the adulation like a starving man, until his gaze deliberately drifted to the very back of the hall. For a fraction of a second his eyes landed directly on me, standing entirely alone in the shadows, and then the corner of his mouth twitched upward into a deeply patronizing, pitying smirk. It was a microscopic, fleeting gesture, totally invisible to everyone else in the cheering room. But to me, it screamed volumes. It was the exact same mocking superior smirk he wore every single Thanksgiving when he would loudly ask if my little cubicle job was getting too stressful, fully aware that our parents would chuckle cruelly at my expense. Standing on that stage, bathed in the spotlight, Daniel genuinely believed he was the apex predator in the room. He believed he was the ultimate weapon. He had absolutely no idea that just 72 hours ago, I was sitting in a highly classified, heavily fortified JSOC bunker, authorizing targeted drone strikes and making split-second life-or-death decisions that actively shaped global geopolitics. I didn't break eye contact. I didn't flinch. And I certainly didn't look away in shame as he so clearly expected me to. I merely observed him with the cold, utterly detached precision of a senior intelligence officer silently identifying a target's fatal, glaring blind spot. The irony of the moment was so thick it was almost physically palpable. This entire grand spectacle, the pristine uniforms, the crisp salutes, the booming brass band, was merely the visible surface layer of the military apparatus. Daniel was just a shiny new cog in a massive machine. I, on the other hand, operated in the crushing lightless currents deep beneath it. I am the unseen architect of the very battlefields he will eventually fight on. I am the one who decides where operators like Daniel are sent to bleed. Tell me, have you ever sat in total icy silence while someone arrogantly mocked your supposed mediocrity, knowing with absolute certainty that you held the power to completely dismantle their entire worldview with a single sentence? Hold that thought, because what happened next shattered their fabricated reality permanently. The ceremony had officially concluded, and the rigid, suffocating military discipline of the massive naval auditorium instantly dissolved into a chaotic, echoing sea of celebration. The air grew impossibly thick, heavy with the overwhelming scent of expensive collog, freshly polished brass, and the palpable, intoxicating arrogance of elite military families who genuinely believed they were the untouchable royalty of the world. Flashbs erupted relentlessly like miniature lightning storms as families frantically rushed the stage to embrace their newly minted seals. From my isolated, deliberately shadowed vantage point, leaning silently against the freezing cold concrete wall near the heavy exit doors, I watched the grand spectacle unfold with the clinical, hyper-focused detachment of a JSOC sniper, calmly observing a target zone through a crosshair. My father, Robert, was entirely in his element, operating exactly, almost pathetically, as my psychological profile of his raging narcissism had predicted. He had aggressively positioned himself and Daniel at the absolute dead center of the room, intentionally blocking the main central aisle to ensure maximum visibility from the high command. He was holding court among a tight exclusive circle of highly decorated retired admirals and JSOC commanders. His chest puffed out so exaggeratedly that his row of combination medals practically caught and reflected the glare of the overhead fluorescent lights. He kept slapping Daniel on the shoulder with a heavy, meaty hand, speaking at a booming volume explicitly designed to force every single person in a 50-foot radius to listen to his endless bragging. He was presenting his son not as a man, but as a prized, thoroughbred, a genetic triumph of the flawless Hayes bloodline. In my mind, the sound of his heavy, self-satisfied laughter twisted and morphed into the sharp, violent, terrifying crack of his fist, hitting the oak dining table right next to my face 12 years ago. The night he screamed with veins bulging in his neck, that my very existence was a defective, humiliating stain on his perfect legacy. He had told me, looking directly into my tear-filled 19-year-old eyes with absolute disgust, that I would never amount to anything more than a pathetic clerical error in a forgotten, windowless office. Now he was soaking up the vicarious glory of my brother's achievement like a starving man, completely and blissfully blind to the catastrophic reality surrounding him. Then the atmospheric pressure in the auditorium abruptly violently shifted. You could physically feel the change in the room before you even saw it. Like the sudden drop in temperature before a massive hurricane. General Thomas Carter, a legendary four-star commander whose very name commanded hushed, terrified reverence in the global special operations community, stepped down from the VIP podium. He was a man who didn't simply walk, he advanced with the heavy, grounding, predatory stride of an apex predator. Flanked by a heavily armed, unsmiling security detail, Carter began moving through the thick crowd. Immediately, the room parted for him like the Red Sea. Officers stepping aside with breathless respect. My father's eyes locked onto the approaching general, and I could practically see the desperate, pathetic greed illuminating his aging face. Robert hurriedly smoothed his tie, aggressively nudged Daniel into a rigid textbook posture of attention, and plastered on a sycophantic, eager, bootlicking smile that made my stomach physically turn. He fully genuinely expected General Carter to stop, shake his golden boy's hand, and validate the Hayes legacy in front of the entire assembled naval brass. As Carter approached their row, Daniel puffed his chest out, a confident, self-assured smirk playing on his lips, his right hand actually twitching upward in premature preparation for a historic career-making handshake. But General Carter didn't even slow his pace. He didn't break his stride for a fraction of a second. He walked straight past Daniel's extended waiting hand. He walked straight past my father's desperate, hungry smile, not even registering their existence as human beings. The general navigated through the sea of confused elite military families, his hardened eyes locked onto the back of the room with absolute unblinking laser-like focus. The ripple effect was instantaneous and utterly deafening in its profound silence. The loud, boisterous chatter in the immediate vicinity died completely, spreading like a virus until the entire section of the hall was dead quiet as the top brass turned their heads to see exactly who a four-star general was breaking protocol to greet. The trajectory of his path led directly, undeniably, to the unremarkable woman in the grey civilian blazer standing entirely alone in the shadows. My father's eager, arrogant smile collapsed into a mask of pure, unadulterated bewilderment. He physically spun around, his polished shoes slipping slightly, trying to track the general's movement, his eyes finally landing on me. For the first time in a decade, my father truly looked at me. Though his fragile, ego-driven brain was violently rejecting the impossible, reality-shattering data his own eyes were currently providing. "Well, I'll be damned to hell." General Carter's voice boomed, cutting through the sudden, suffocating graveyard silence of the hall like a serrated tactical blade. He stopped exactly 3 feet in front of me. His intimidating, commanding posture instantly shifting from that of an untouchable superior to one of undeniable peer-level respect. "Captain Hayes, JSOC didn't inform me you were stateside. I thought you were still buried deep in the sandbox." The title hung in the dead air, a heavy explosive payload waiting to detonate, echoing off the walls for everyone to hear. I squared my shoulders, 12 years of highly classified, brutal muscle memory effortlessly overriding my unassuming civilian attire, and met his gaze perfectly. My voice was steady, freezing cold, and carried just enough measured volume to reach the eavesdropping admiral standing perfectly still behind him. "It's Colonel now, sir, and my presence stateside is strictly temporary. I deploy again in exactly 48 hours to Sector 4. General Carter let out a sharp booming laugh of genuine unrestrained approval, shaking his head in sheer awe. "Colonel, of course it is. I should have known. After the absolute, undeniable masterpiece of a psychological warfare operation you orchestrated in Damascus last month, I should have assumed the Pentagon would fast-track your star. Your extraction parameters and real-time satellite manipulation saved 2 of my covert Tier 1 teams when the entire grid went completely dark. You pulled my men out of hell, Colonel. We owe you our lives. You are a ghost. But you are the best damn ghost we have in the entire military apparatus." Before I could even formulate a response, the frantic, humiliating sound of scuffling shoes and heavy, desperate breathing violently interrupted the moment. My father had practically shoved his way through the crowd of shocked admirals, violently dragging Daniel and my mother behind him like tangled, desperate anchors. Robert's face was flushed a deep mottled purplish red, an ugly, chaotic, terrifying mix of panic, profound confusion, and his deeply ingrained narcissistic need to control the narrative at all costs. "General Carter, excuse me, sir, Please. My father stammered, breathlessly, stepping between us as if trying to physically shield the general from a contagious disease. His hands literally shaking. There must be some profound, terrible misunderstanding here. This is my daughter Samantha. She's a civilian, sir. She washed out of the Naval Academy over a decade ago because she couldn't handle the physical and mental pressure of the basic program. She works in commercial insurance in a cubicle. You absolutely have her confused with another operative. She doesn't belong here. The silence that fell over our section of the auditorium was absolute, suffocating, and terrifying. The air grew so incredibly thick you could choke on it. You could hear a pin drop on the carpet. General Carter slowly, deliberately, and dangerously turned his head to look at my father. The warmth completely vanished from the general's eyes, replaced by the freezing, unforgiving, dead-eyed stare of an apex commander assessing a pathetic, catastrophic failure in leadership. A dropout, Carter repeated, his voice dropping to a dangerous growly register that made the surrounding senior officers instinctively take a physical step back. He looked from my father's sweating, panicking face to Daniel's trembling hands and then back to me. The pieces of a sickening, abusive puzzle snapping together in his brilliant strategic mind. Captain Hayes, you mean to tell me standing here in front of all these decorated officers that you are completely, blissfully, arrogantly unaware that your own daughter is one of the highest-ranking, most lethally effective intelligence architects in the entire Joint Special Operations Command? The words struck my father like physical, brutal blows to the chest from a sledgehammer. His mouth opened and closed soundlessly, his eyes bulging like a fish suffocating on dry land, unable to process the total destruction of his worldview. The Dropout story was a highly classified Level 8 cover narrative mandated by the Pentagon because her intellect was far too brilliant to waste on conventional ground-level warfare. Carter continued, his tone dripping with absolute unfiltered venomous disgust, ensuring every single admiral heard him. She doesn't sell insurance, Captain. She hunts monsters in the dark. She is the invisible shield that keeps this entire country breathing while men like you stand around playing dress-up and polishing your medals. And she vastly, unequivocally, and permanently outranks your son. The psychological, emotional, and social collapse of my family was instantaneous, excruciatingly public, and utterly brutal to witness. The reality didn't just slowly dawn on them. It crushed them instantly under the suffocating, inescapable weight of 12 years of their own blinding, toxic, unforgivable arrogance. My father stumbled backward a full step, his polished dress shoes scraping awkwardly against the floor, the color completely draining from his face until he looked like a graying, hollowed-out corpse, his chest puffed out so proudly just minutes ago, collapsed inward. The surrounding retired admirals and Navy peers, the very men whose respect Robert worshipped and craved more than oxygen itself, began murmuring. I watched with absolute clinical satisfaction as their expressions shifted rapidly from mild confusion to undisguised, visceral, burning contempt. In the elite military community, loyalty to one's own blood and recognizing excellence is a sacred, unbreakable oath. Discovering that a decorated captain had publicly shamed, mocked, and discarded his own daughter because his fragile ego was too small to recognize, a covert operator was a permanent, unforgivable stain. I watched as Admiral Vance, a man my father had been desperately trying to impress all evening, literally took a deliberate physical step away from Robert, creating a circle of absolute social quarantine around my family. No one wanted to be standing near the man who had just been verbally executed by General Carter. Robert's entire carefully curated legacy, decades of networking, posturing, and bragging, evaporated into thin air in a matter of seconds. He was no longer a respected veteran. He was a pathetic, ignorant fool who had bullied a superior officer. My mother, Linda, let out a strangled, high-pitched, pathetic gasp that sounded exactly like a dying bird. Her knees visibly buckled beneath her and her grip failed. She dropped her crystal champagne flute, the glass shattered violently on the polished floor, the sharp, piercing sound echoing loudly in the silent room. A perfect poetic beautiful metaphor for her entire fabricated fake life. She had to violently grab Daniel's arm, digging her manicured nails deep into his pristine white uniform to keep her perfectly dressed self from collapsing entirely onto the ground in a sobbing heap. The pristine, flawless country club image she had ruthlessly curated for over a decade, shattered into a million jagged pieces of crushing guilt and horrifying realization. For 12 years, she had treated an American war hero like a diseased stray, hiding me away to protect her vapid social status at her meaningless luncheons. Now, the entire room knew exactly what kind of hollow, superficial monster she really was, but Daniel's situation was arguably the most poetic, devastating, and thoroughly deserved of all. The golden boy standing there with his brand new shiny trident pinned proudly to his chest suddenly looked like a frightened, pathetic little boy playing dress-up in his father's oversized clothes. His SEAL buddies, who had gathered around just moments ago to witness the general's approach, were now staring at Daniel with profound, unmistakable disdain. The Brotherhood of Special Operators does not tolerate unearned arrogance, especially when it is built on the backs of silent professionals who actually do the bleeding in the shadows. I watched as one of Daniel's squad mates, a hardened operator with a scarred face, simply shook his head in absolute disgust, turned his back entirely on my brother, and walked away without a single word. In exactly 60 seconds, Daniel's crowning achievement was completely eclipsed, permanently tainted, and rendered utterly worthless by the revelation of his family's toxic narcissism. He wasn't the apex predator of the Hayes family. Compared to the commander standing in front of him, he was merely an expendable entry-level foot soldier who didn't even know who called the shots. My father finally found his voice. A weak, trembling, pathetic rasp that sounded absolutely nothing like the booming, terrifying tyrant who had relentlessly tormented my youth. "Samantha, Sam, my God, why didn't you tell us? We didn't know. I'm so sorry. We didn't know anything." Let me ask you, watching this, when the very people who systematically broke your spirit, humiliated you, and mocked your existence for 12 agonizing years finally realize their grave, catastrophic mistake, does their sudden panic-induced regret erase the decade of psychological torture they inflicted? If you were standing in my shoes, looking at the absolute smoldering ruins of their arrogance, watching them choke on their own shame, would you offer them even a single ounce of forgiveness? I didn't offer a single tear. I didn't offer a comforting smile, nor did my facial expression soften for even a fraction of a microcond. I stood there like a statue carved from absolute zero ice. I simply looked at my father with the exact same cold, dead-eyed, dismissive expression he had given me the night he told me I was a worthless disgrace to our family name. You didn't need to know my JSOC rank, my deployment history, or my top-secret security clearance to treat me with basic human decency. "Robert," I stated, my voice completely devoid of any emotion, cutting through the suffocating silence of the room like a perfectly sharpened surgical scalpel. "You didn't need a highly classified Pentagon briefing to be a father. You just needed to love me without conditions. But you couldn't do that. Your love was entirely transactional, built on what people could do for your ego. You only value me right now in this exact moment because of the eagle on my shoulder and the stars on my chest. And that makes your desperate, pathetic apology entirely, fundamentally worthless to me." My mother broke away from Daniel, tears violently streaming down her face in ugly, dark streaks, completely ruining her expensive, carefully applied makeup. Her trembling, manicured hands reached out in a desperate, frantic bid for physical contact, terrified of the public judgment and social execution raining down on her from the surrounding officers. "Samantha, please. We're so sorry. You're our little girl. We can fix this. We can go to family therapy. We can start over. Please, just talk to us. Don't do this here." I took a deliberate, measured step backward, ensuring her grasping hands caught nothing but empty cold air. I didn't let her touch me. "There is no we, Linda. There hasn't been for a very long time. You spent 12 years burying me alive to protect your fragile, pathetic social status at your luncheons. You made your choice every single Thanksgiving when you mocked my job. Every single Christmas when you ignored my presence. Every single time you looked right past me to blindly praise your golden boy, you chose your legacy. Now live with it." I shifted my piercing, unrelenting gaze to Daniel, who was currently staring intently at his own polished boots. His face flushed with a humiliation so deep and agonizing he couldn't even make eye contact with his own peers. He looked entirely broken. The grand lifelong illusion of his superiority shattered forever into unrecoverable dust. "Enjoy your trident, Daniel," I said softly. but with enough tactical projection that his surrounding SEAL teammates heard every single terrifying, emasculating word. A shiny pin on your chest doesn't make you a man. It just makes you a highly visible target on a map. Try to learn the quiet honor in the field that you couldn't learn in your own home. And try your absolute hardest not to miss your extraction window when my office sends you into the dark, because I'm the one sitting in the chair who decides if the chopper waits for you or if it leaves you behind. I turned my back on my family for the absolute final time and faced General Carter, offering him a crisp, flawless, textbook salute, which the 4-star general returned with deep, solemn, unwavering respect. "If you'll excuse me, General, I have a classified debriefing at Langley, and my JSOC transport is waiting outside." I didn't wait for his verbal dismissal, nor did I look back at the absolute smoking wreckage I was leaving behind. As I walked out the heavy double doors into the blinding, beautiful California sun, the suffocating, humiliating, deathly silence I left in that auditorium was the heaviest burden my family would ever carry for the rest of their miserable lives. I didn't just reclaim my truth today. I permanently, ruthlessly, and surgically dismantled their false legacy. And as I stepped into the back of the waiting armored black SUV, leaving them trapped in the absolute hell of their own making, I felt absolutely nothing but pure, unadulterated, magnificent freedom. Leave a comment below. Would you have walked out the door without looking back like I did, leaving them to burn in the ashes of their own monumental egos? Or would you have stayed to watch them suffer a little longer? Hit subscribe and like if you believe that sometimes the ultimate revenge isn't screaming, crying, or fighting. It's simply walking away and letting toxic people drown in the inescapable, agonizing reality of their own actions.